Shop Founder Friday edition. Today we're talking with Jeff Taylor of PT's Coffee and Bird Rock Coffee. Well, hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFurio. I'm your host for the show, and this is going to be a great Founder Friday. At the end of every month, we do a thing called Founder Friday, and we focus on a founder of some of the world's best coffee bars. Have had some amazing guests on this segment. This is one of the most popular segments of Keys to the Shop, and learning about people's stories is always fun and inspiring. Today's episode is no exception. Now, I want to remind you to subscribe to Keys to the Shop. That way you'll always be updated when new episodes come out. There are quite a few that come out, about 9 every month when you count the shift breaks. And just hit subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And also, if you can leave a rating or review on iTunes, that would mean the world to me. Thank you to all of you who have done that. It really means a lot. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Prima Coffee. Prima Coffee is one of the world's best specialty coffee equipment suppliers, and they focus on curating the best equipment that they can find from across the globe and then fitting it perfectly with your needs. As a coffee business person, you've got a lot of questions about what machines are the right ones to get for your situation, and Prima Coffee not only has the machines, they have the answers as well. They are experts in what they do. And when you go to their website, prima-coffee.com, you'll see what I mean. They have an amazing array of choices as far as equipment goes. Grinders, brewers, espresso machines, under-counter refrigeration also. So just the whole spectrum of equipment that you could choose from. But also they have a lot of free resources that helps equip you and empower you to use this equipment well and make great coffee, which is really what we're all in this for, and it's certainly what drives Prima Coffee. I've always loved working with Prima Coffee, and I think you will too. Go visit them over at prima-coffee.com/keys. Again, that's prima-coffee.com/keys. This episode is also brought to you by the wonderful Pacific Barista Series, the line of plant-based performance beverages that really elevates the plant-based options in your cafe. They are really and truly performance beverages because so much R&D goes into every product in this line, from the soy, oat, hemp, coconut, rice, etc. They not only create these products for professional baristas, but they work directly with some of the world's best baristas to make sure that the products stand up to the excellent standards that professional baristas have. So when you get that product on your bar, you know it's going to take the heat from steaming. It's going to produce texture that's perfect for latte art and keep the flavor balance of the beverage focused on coffee. All of these things make it a perfect choice for your cafe's menu. Your customers will definitely thank you. So go to pacificfoods.com. You can just follow the link in the show notes for more information. Try this out in your shop ASAP to see how the Barista Series from Pacific can elevate the plant-based offerings in your cafe. All right, so today we get to talk with an old friend of mine that I got to meet back in like 2005 or so. And that was, well into his coffee career because he's been in it for, 26 years, since 1993. Jeff Taylor, he's the co-founder and CEO of PT's Coffee, as well as the owner and president of Bird Rock Coffee, which is in San Diego. Prior to co-founding PT's with his business partner, Fred Polzin, in 1993, Jeff was an award-winning photojournalist for several newspaper and wire services, including the Topeka Capital Journal and Reuters news service focusing on professional sports photography. It has been published in many national publications, including Sports Illustrated, the New York Times, USA Today, ESPN, the magazine, just to name a few. Jeff earned a number of awards from the Associated Press and Inland Press Association and the National Press Photographers Association before retiring from photojournalism in 2004 to pursue his coffee passions. Jeff worked with a select group to develop eventually what became the United States Barista Competition, dating back to 1999. And in that year, a member of PT's staff placed second in the little-known Tirani Barista Competition. As a member of the founding committee for the USBC, Jeff traveled around the world judging the Barista Competition, Mexican National Barista Competition, and the World Barista Competition. After several years of voluntary service, he returned to focus on developing PT's direct trade program and sourcing coffee directly from origin. And this was one of the first of its kind in our industry. So a lot of firsts for Jeff with the competition, and as well as this direct trade model and program. Now, today, PT's coffee roasting company and Bird Rock Coffee Roasters, which Jeff acquired in 2017, source approximately 85% of their coffees from farmers directly through this program. Jeff made the transition to coffee buyer for PT's Coffee in 2004 and began the process of building relationships with producers around the world, specifically with the best producers in each country. And to this day, Jeff travels to meet with the coffee producing partners they have in Central and South America and Africa to experiment, source, and evaluate the harvest from each farm and develop strategies and partnering on social projects. Jeff has also served a term on the Specialty Coffee Association Board of Directors through 2010. Following his time with the SCAA, he returned to focus on growing the business, sharing sourcing responsibilities with his wife, Maritza Taylor, and their director of operations so that he can lead the transition to purchase Bird Rock Coffee Roasters in San Diego, 2016. Jeff now leads an amazing team of coffee professionals that run 10 cafes, 2 wholesale roasting companies in 3 states, and we are going to get the inside story on all of this today on this Founder Friday. We're going through the decades, and this is really just a fascinating conversation because Jeff has seen a ton of history unfold through his company and through his service at the SCA, etc. There's a lot to learn here. Specifically, I think a theme throughout this whole conversation you'll see is that you just have to be patient with the evolution of your business, and you'll see wonderful things happen if you make the next right move. And I can't wait to share this conversation with you as we detail the journey that Jeff took from 1993 in just a small cafe in Topeka, Kansas, to now being at the helm of some of the world's best roasting and sourcing and cafes. This is really a great journey, and it's such an honor to know Jeff and to get to share his story with you. So I hope that you find this really useful, and here we go. Here now is my conversation with Jeff Taylor of PT's Coffee and Bird Rock Coffee. Well, hey, Jeff, welcome to Keys to the Shop. How in the world are you?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
I've known you for quite a long time. It has to be over 10 years now. And I've just loved the evolution of what you've been doing in coffee, and I'm really excited to get to talk to you today about that specifically. We're going to touch on a lot of different, I guess you could call them epochs of what you've been doing in coffee. So let's start at the beginning and say, like, how did you get started in coffee and then found PTs?
I was a photographer by trade, working as a photojournalist, and very happy working as a photojournalist. Wasn't really looking for a different career path. Wasn't looking specifically to get into coffee or out of the corporate world or anything of that nature. I had just relocated to Topeka, Kansas, from a small newspaper I'd been working at in Lewiston, Idaho. And when I got to Topeka, it became very apparent that in 1990, no coffee had found its way there yet. I was familiar with espresso carts in the Northwest. This is before Starbucks went public, for those of you who are unaware that there was a period before Starbucks went public. There were espresso carts on the street in the Northwest, and so I was familiar with those and would often stop and get a latte, but never really thought much of it. And then when I moved back to Topeka and I was working as a photojournalist there, it dawned on me, there's no coffee here. And that was kind of disturbing because I wanted a latte. And so one day after looking long and far and driving 30 minutes on the weekends just to get a cup of coffee. I actually just decided, you know what, I'm going to open a small cafe. It can't be that tough. And quite honestly, in the early 90s, coffee wasn't what it is today. It was much more generic back then. And so opening a small cafe was actually very easy back then. We started with zero money out of our own pocket, to be quite honest. I borrowed a couple $1,000s from my mom. My business partner, Fred, borrowed a couple $1,000s from his parents. And we borrowed a couple $1,000s from a friend of ours, or a friend of mine, who was also a photojournalist, who was familiar with the concept since he now lived in the Northwest. And he said, I know what you're doing. I'll loan you some money. So we started with $6,000, all borrowed. And then we went to the bank and said, we got $6,000. We want to borrow an additional $6,000 so we can buy an espresso machine, a couple other things here and there. We've got a location, and voila, on $12,000, all borrowed money, we were open for business.
Wow.
And so that's how we got started.
I mean, so it's bootstrap for sure.
Beyond bootstrap, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So not some large financial investors and the kind of things that we see today for people just getting started. And the industry has just changed so much, and it's a different ballgame altogether today. But with that low barrier of entry in terms of starting a coffee shop, because it was just a different culture back then. It still is a difficult thing to just turn away from what you had been doing previously. That was very promising. You were an award-winning photojournalist, and that was a pretty solid career. And making the move into coffee, it has yet to show itself as being, as solid. Over a time, of course, now we see that's the case, but. What was your mentality going into this thing? Take us through what you were thinking as you opened the doors and experienced the first rush of customers that came in for what you had built.
It was actually very interesting because originally I just wanted to be able to provide myself with a good, consistent cup of coffee. I wanted to get that. It wasn't I opened a business because I wanted to make money. Again, I loved my career. I loved what I was doing. And that's how I ended up with a partner, by the way. My partner used to run some, manage 3 Schlotzsky's delis, sandwich shops. And he was my roommate at the time as well. And I asked him if he would come on and run this cafe for me that I wanted to open. And I'd give him half the business if he would just, help me run it, since I couldn't do it working a full-time job. And so he said, yeah, I'll do that. And so he quit his job. He came over and started running our cafe. Meanwhile, I kept my job as a photojournalist. And so initially, I would open the cafe in the morning. I may come back, late afternoon, help close it, or, the shifts always changed. But it was amazing. We didn't know what to expect. We didn't know how many people would like what we were doing. It was espresso. And in the early days in the 1990s, not everybody even knew what espresso was. But we were shocked that we actually had a good line. Well, not a line in the morning. In the morning, our business just gradually grew. We grew a nice following of friends and customers who became friends in our morning shift. Originally, in the early 90s, in 93, 94, a lot of our business was coming in the weekend nights and at night during the week. And we'd have live music. We'd have poetry readings. It was that sort of thing. And that's where our business was coming from back then. It was your classic friends type of coffee shop. We used to have a friends night where we would watch Friends on TV in our cafe. And we'd all sit on the couch and watch Friends on TV. Yeah. So in the early days, it really was kind of like that. That's what kind of a coffee shop we had. I was going to share that the other thing that was interesting to me when we first opened was that when we first opened, naively so, we thought all of our good friends who I knew at the newspaper and I knew around town, surely they'll all come out to support us on a regular basis.
Yeah.
They'll want us to do well. Surely they'll all be there. They are not. You'll find that's true when you open your business as well. The closest friends, they have lives and they're not as into coffee oftentimes as we are. And so they might come out and support you one time, but they're not going to be your business. They'll come and say, hi, congratulations, I wish you well. And then they're going to go back to their lives. Your job is to build a loyal clientele of customers who love your product. And that oftentimes is not the same as your friends. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And
that was the experience we had. And I've learned not to count on those people who are closest to me. In fact, I oftentimes tell them, you're under no obligation to come support my business. Only come if you want to, because I understand you have your own life and your own interests. So
sure.
Anyway,
I mean,
so that's how we got started.
Your friends and your family, and there you have a common bond that's not coffee with them, and somehow it
correct
seems like they should be able to, but even if they do, and I've heard this from a lot of people, my own consulting or interviews on the show, that they'll fall off over the course, even if they're showing up in force at first. Eventually,
exactly.
They just can't muster a few more months.
That's it. That's it. Yeah. So you have to build a loyal following and a constantly changing and growing following. The other thing we noticed was that there were always people growing up and moving. And so once we grew to a certain size, we were so excited. We had this loyal group of customers who were coming in, but then we noticed 6 months, 9 months, a year later, wow, we had different customers all of a sudden. Same size. We were still doing the same volume, but some of the customers had changed. And so we started asking questions and found out, oh yeah, so-and-so moved. This person went to college. There were different things. People were always changing. And so there's always an evolution of your business, and you can never really stop hustling is what it boils down to. And educating, hustling and educating.
Well, that's a good motto. So you started out and you had this Friends Like Coffee bar, and as people change, the business obviously has to change along with the people. So as the first iteration of PTs got its stride with and found its regulars, what would you say was the first sort of shift of your operational mode? Like, okay, we've been doing business this way for, X number of months or years, and now it looks like we need to have iteration number 2. What was that like, and what was the catalyst for it?
Yeah, there was a real defining moment, I'll be honest with you. And oftentimes, I honestly believe this, oftentimes it takes something like this to shift a mindset. But again, we had a good following. I was living on cloud 9, having success being a photojournalist and a coffee shop that's now making me money, and it's successful and everything's going well. And so we opened a second coffee shop. And shortly thereafter, the second one had a line, and it was growing. And I literally laid the tile in that shop myself. I built it. The whole thing, what Fred and I did ourselves. And so we had this great pride in. So we're feeling pretty good about ourselves. 2 coffee shops that are now busy and growing, and we're making money. And we're like, wow, this is fantastic. And one day, I was walking down the street in Lawrence, Kansas, and I call him an old curmudgeon. I don't know who he is to this day. I don't remember his name. And he's got to be his late 70s at this point. He was a good 25, 30 years older than me. Anyway, he said, he mentioned to me that, he was at my place last weekend. And at this point, I'm feeling my oats. I'm feeling good about what I've done. I've got 2 coffee shops that are both busy and somewhat successful. And so I'm feeling good. So yeah, how'd you like it? Was it good? You like it? Everything was great? And I'm big-eyed and bushy-tailed and smiling to him. And he's like, yeah, your coffee kind of sucked. My jaw hit the ground. I was like, what? I was expecting him to rave right back to me how great we were doing. In return, I got honesty. And that was something I hadn't heard much of, was honesty. Not that anybody was lying to me, don't misunderstand, but everybody was just happy we were doing well, and so was I. But to have a customer actually say, your product really isn't that great. Sure, you may have a coffee shop and have customers, but your product really isn't that great. And it opened my eyes. And so I went back to the cafe the next morning and started looking at our coffee and tasting it a little bit differently and going, wait a second, let me think about this for a little bit, because I was so caught up in the business and the excitement of opening the cafe, and running the espresso machine, learning how to be a barista and all those things, that I kind of lost sight of the coffee I was buying and what was it, where was it from, and what it tastes like, and what should it taste like. And keep in mind, this is the early 90s, before there truly was specialty coffee as we know it today. So it was a little bit eye-opening to me. And so I had to explore, dig deep and try to figure, okay, what's going to make a difference? Because if I'm going to stay in business, this guy just pointed out a real revelation to me that I may have business right now, but unless I improve my product, most of these customers are going to go by the wayside as well.
Some of them probably think the same way he does.
Exactly correct. And I started believing that, if I'm going to be in business, I got to improve my coffee. The only thing that's going to keep me in business is having great coffee. And that will ensure that I can be in business for a long time if I always have the best coffee I can do. I don't want to say the best coffee on the market or the top 1%, because all that's a bunch of marketing and everybody's trying to say the same thing. I'm saying I buy the best coffees I can find at any given moment, and I believe them to be some of the best coffees on the market. But back then I realized I wasn't doing that. I was just buying from another big, at that point, and in fact, this company still is very big. In the early days, we were buying from a company called Gavinia, who was a big roaster. They're a big name brand. And we were buying coffees from them because they were inexpensive, quite honestly. And at the time, that's all I was thinking about. So I ordered coffee in from 2 or 3 other roasters, and I brewed them up. I wasn't doing cupping at this point, but I ordered the coffee in from 2 or 3 different roasters, and I brewed them all side by side and tasted them all, did a little tasting with some other friends and customers. And I was like, none of these are very good. We thought this one's probably a little bit better, but quite honestly, of all 4 of these coffees sitting here, none of them are really great. None of them, they're just coffees. They're just blah. They're kind of middle of the road. They're not something we would say really tasted amazing. So at this point, I'm still trying to figure out what's going to make the difference. And in conversations with friends, I thought, the thing that would make a difference is if we roasted our own, because it would be fresh. It's very possible the coffee I was buying from these other roasters had been roasted 2 or 3 weeks ago or a month ago. Who knows? And it had been sitting on a shelf. And when I placed my order, they put it in a box and shipped it to me. And so I kind of went on a mission at that point that, well, how do I learn to roast? How can I learn to roast my own coffee? Because that would be a great ambiance for the cafe. It would allow me to actually source and buy my own green product. And I just really fell in love with that concept. So we saved up some money, and in 1997, we bought our first Dietrich roaster from Steve Dietrich. Flew to Idaho and took a roasting course from him, and and we were off and on our way. And I spent the next 2 years roasting in the cafe and still working a full-time job at the Capital Journal. And then one day, I'd kind of had it. I was just getting tired, and I was getting frustrated with my photojournalism job, in part because they were getting frustrated with me doing something on the side. You can imagine, right? Because I was starting to get passionate about coffee, inadvertently, kind of stumbling and falling into it. And my boss was kind of getting frustrated with me that I wasn't more focused on my photography career. And I just thought, I really want to be my own boss and do coffee. And so I gave it some thought, and I walked in and gave my notice. And my boss at the time said, "Are you kidding me? You're giving up your career to run a coffee shop?" That made me step back for a second. I stepped back, took a breath, and then I turned and looked at him and said, "Yeah, I am." And I did. And I walked out, and I realized, now I really have to figure out how to make this work, because I just quit my job. So I dove into roasting with a new passion and a new focus. Spent 2 years roasting coffee, documenting every 15 seconds, making notes, buying every book I could find on coffee back in the mid-90s, reading everything I could read about every single origin. I found a notebook the other day, an old journal I had, where I literally had handwritten all the way through it, breaking down every single country by origin, and with any notes I could find about every one of them. Again, not micro lots, but about countries and coffee's countries produced, which is interesting too. It's so generic.
So now you're in this for the long haul. This is now your career, do or die, really. And you just mentioned that you dove into roasting kind of with a renewed vigor, or maybe more than you had when you had a little bit more security when having a second job.
Correct.
When you're pursuing roasting to that degree now, what are you comparing your results against? Are you learning from organization? You say the books, but the books don't have, you can't taste the books, right? So you're learning. Are you traveling and tasting coffees? Are you going to conferences, or what was available back then for you to benchmark yourself against?
That's a great question. I've always lamented that the one disadvantage I gave to myself, because if I could go back and do it all over again, I would approach it differently. But because I started a shop not knowing anything and I just jumped in, I had no one to learn from. I was the boss. And I really couldn't hire anyone in Topeka, Kansas that knew more than coffee than I did. And so I found myself, where do I learn? And so I joined the Specialty Coffee Association. Actually, we were already members of the Specialty Coffee Association since I think our first trade show was in 1994. We didn't participate as a vendor, but we attended the trade show and took classes in 1994 and virtually every year after that. And so that was one way to learn, and I would taste coffees at the trade show. I was always also working with some importers who would work with me and tell me what good. Tim Chaplain was always a great resource, who could give me feedback on what good coffees were. And when he had something that came in that he thought was good, he would share with me. But a lot of it was just trial and error. And I'll be honest with you, the first 9 months I roasted, virtually everything was burnt. Because in my opinion, again, this is the mid-90s, everything had to be roasted to second crack. And then I had this revelation getting late into the 1990s that, wow, what if I roasted something, lighter? And so it was a slow evolution. It was a slow learning process, basically, of just a constant change and trying to find something that was better. But so one of the things I went through, Chris, if I can continue just a little bit, is even when I started roasting my own coffee, and again, we were still roasting dark, even when I started roasting lighter, I couldn't really find a point where my coffee was any better than those other roasters I had been buying from. And so again, even after I was roasting my own coffee and it was fresh, I still had this problem that it still didn't taste great, or what I had in my mind that great coffee should taste like. And so I started asking a lot of questions. And again, I knew Ted Lingle at the SCAA, and I'd met a bunch of people, and I got invited to take a trip to Guatemala in 2000. I can't remember, it was either 2000 or 2001. Take a trip to Guatemala, and George Howell was on the trip, and many others. And one of the things, the reasons we were on the trip, first of all, was that there was a true coffee crisis back then. We're still going through a little bit where the prices in a, low 90-cent range, or just hovering just above $1. But back then in 1998, 1999, 2000, 2001, the C market back then was at 47 cents, hovering between 47 cents and 60 cents per pound. And so it was a true coffee crisis. I didn't know enough to have an impact on what that meant, other than, yeah, that seems low. I'm able to make money on it. So I was kind of conflicted as to what that meant until I took that trip to Guatemala. On that trip, we talked to a lot of great farmers in Guatemala who seemed very knowledgeable, who they had learned from their fathers. They had pretty good sized companies. A lot of those Guatemalan producers we met with, I still see on trips to Guatemala to this day. El Inierto, a number of others. And one of the things we learned was and not so much in those good name farms, but some of the other mills that we went to, was that the problem was coffee was priced so low that they couldn't make a profit on it. And so it became triage. Just strip the trees of coffee and take it to the mill and process it. And you didn't even really spend your money cleaning the mill that much back in those days, because you didn't want to spend the extra money on labor. Even though it was inexpensive labor, there was just no money in it. What we learned was the cost to produce a pound of coffee back then was around $1.20. It's not much higher than that now. I think it might be up at $1.70 now or something, but Rick Reinhardt can give you a better answer on that. But back then, selling for 47 cents, farmers were going bankrupt. And so, for me, it was just eye-opening to meet farmers and to be a part of that, and then encouraging them to enter the first ever Cup of Excellence in Guatemala, and then being able to taste those coffees and buy the first coffee that came out of that Cup of Excellence. And that was really the first time I tasted a great coffee, or a coffee that was, wow, this coffee is so much better than the other coffees I've been buying. And so that was kind of an eye-opening moment to me. And it was a Cup of Excellence coffee that came out of 2001, 2002, from Guatemala.
So this time where you discovered basically that the raw ingredient was the missing component for, it was holding you back from what you could get from your coffee. So you needed to source the coffee better. Now, today you source, I believe, 85% of your coffee direct source, correct? Direct
Roughly,
trade.
yes.
So
yeah, we have a couple people in Guatemala right now.
Was that the beginning of this pursuit of your direct trade as a company?
Yeah, that was really the beginning. Again, that trip, I was still so new and still trying to put it all together in my head of what it was all about and how the international trade worked, because I was such a novice at all of it, right? And so it was a good trip, and then I took a trip to Costa Rica the following year, met some more farmers, and a trip to Brazil the year after that. And each trip, it's like, oh, I'm starting to see how this all works now, right? I'm starting to understand the processing of coffee and what a washed coffee is. And they were just discovering pulp naturals back then, and doing some work with that in Brazil. And so, yeah, I was putting it all together. And then the Cup of Excellence was really the turning point for what we could do to actually offer a better price, because the Cup of Excellence was encouraging farmers to enter their best small lot from their own farm, right? Pick the best area of land you have and enter that section of coffee, enter that into the Cup of Excellence. And so as I started going to Cup of Excellences and judging in those early days, I started meeting the farmers, and I wanted to buy coffee from those winning farmers. That's how I met Aida, Sergio Ticas in El Salvador, and Lucia from Las Mercedes. She got first place, and Sergio got second place in El Salvador. That's how I met them all, is we would go to those Cup of Excellence events, and then we would go up and introduce ourselves to the producers afterwards, and try to build relationships and go visit their farm, and buy their coffee out of auction the next year. And again, offering them a better price. Where the market was now maybe up to $1 a pound in 2003, 2004, 2005, 2006, I was offering $3.50 for a pound of coffee. And so those farmers wanted to work with us. And so we were able to buy really good coffees back then.
Quite a change from just a coffee shop built on a couple of small loans from family and a side job.
Yeah.
And now you're actually addressing major, you're big enough and connected enough to be able to address some major issues within an industry. It doesn't seem like you set out necessarily to have these grand aspirations, even years in. It seems as though it was just sort of a step-by-step, like doing the next right thing or the next right thing for your business. It led to these relationships, and this led to that, and so forth. Is that accurate, or did 100%. You actually plan? Okay.
No, 100%. That's what I kept trying to think of the words and how I could explain that. But it wasn't like I had this grand education. I knew exactly what I wanted to do, and I'm going to set out to achieve it. I was just trying to learn. I was still trying to figure out, how do I get better at this? How come I don't understand the processing they're doing? Because it's not making sense to me. And each step I had to try and just put it all together. And each year I got a little bit more information, or I think I understood it a little bit better each year. And again, it was one trip a year, and it just took me time to put it all together and digest it all. And the importing was an interesting aspect as well, because back in the early 2000s, 2005, 2006, when I would buy coffee from Sergio or from Los Planes or Lucia from Las Mercedes, or somebody in Panama or wherever, it was oftentimes I would buy 10 bags. 10 bags was a round number because that's what fit on a pallet. That's what made a full pallet of coffee. And so I would say we would buy 10 bags or we'd buy 20 bags. And then I would just make a call to all the different importers I knew. hey, do you have room on one of your containers I can piggyback and get some coffee out of Panama or out of Costa Rica or out of, wherever, El Salvador? And they'd say, sure, well, we can do that for 15 cents. Just cover my costs. We're good. Well, helps us fill up our container. And so it was almost like a favor, and they would charge me somewhat cost back in those days. Maybe cost plus a few cents. It was doing them a favor too, because they were filling up their container, and it was helping their cost ever so slightly, And then over time, as we were bringing in more and more coffee, and I was calling in more and more favors to piggyback coffee on other people's containers, that price started creeping up. Next thing I know, it was 21 cents. And a couple of years later, it was 27 cents. And now there's sometimes you go out there to try and bring in coffee that you want to say that you source direct, and importers are going to charge you 40 cents, 45 cents, or they'd like to. And if you're doing that, you're really costing yourself a lot more than if you would just buy it direct from an importer. The only advantage you're gaining is that you got a chance to visit, but you actually paid for the trip, and now you're paying extra to bring the coffee in as well. And so it's really, the industry on the direct trade side really has changed. And so now we're trying to, bring in container loads wherever is possible, so that we can negotiate our fees a little bit better.
I want to go take a step, not back, but in a little bit to the operation of the cafe. As you develop your roasting business, for a lot of us, the cafe is the place where you taste the coffee, where the baristas tell you what the espresso tastes like, what the drip coffee tastes like, and all that, the cupping, everything. Yeah. So how did the cafe and the standard for its operation and the baristas evolve alongside the roasting and sourcing?
Well, they're all pretty big jobs, and I would say it's virtually impossible to do everything yourself, and that's what I learned. We always had good people working with us, and that was always helpful. Holly Baston was always fantastic, helped us on the human resources side. When I first met Holly, she was drinking white chocolate mochas, and we slowly brought her in and trained her how to be a barista, and then had a conversation like, Holly, what do you want to do in this business? Let me help you find a career. And next thing I know, she was doing training for us and then helping on the human resources side. And so, we had good staff along the way, and I literally had to trust them to manage the cafe portion as I started traveling to Origin, because I literally couldn't be both places at once. And I knew where I wanted to be was traveling to Origin and buying coffee and learning about coffee. That's where my real fascination and passion came in. And Holly was just really enjoying running the cafes and learning more every single day. And so I kind of turned that side of that over to her and my business partner, Fred. And that became what they did. And I traveled and bought coffee. Found myself traveling 6 months a year. And then eventually when I met my wife in Ecuador, the first couple of years, it was first year after we got married, and probably a year before we got married, she and I were traveling 6 to 9 months a year to different all around the world buying coffee. And then it became time we needed to settle down a little bit. We were traveling too much. Then we wanted to settle down and kind of start thinking about having a family and getting married and all that.
So now you're trusting other people to develop this side of the business that you just didn't have time for. At the same time, there has to be communication between the two sides, and for quality control and everything else. So I wonder, was there any kind of step up in those years where you started to get better coffees? And I imagine you're going to want to communicate to the staff and the trainers, et cetera, that, hey, let's look at our training a little bit more. Let's get better equipment in the cafe so we can better highlight these coffees. Were those kind of conversations happening around that time?
They were. Actually, in the early days, I trained Holly and I trained Jim Smith how to be baristas. And even for the first couple competition years, I trained with them. And then eventually I was traveling and I was just losing interest in and a lot of the other stuff, and Holly took that over. So Holly put together the training manual, and she focused on all that, and the quality control of the coffee itself. Holly would manage. I still put together the espresso blends because I knew the coffees better, and I roasted the coffees or had a roaster. At this point, I'd even outsourced the roasting. We'd hired other people to do the I'd hired another guy and trained them to roast. But I was still doing all the cupping and all the blending and putting blends together. But Holly would actually do the quality control, pulling the shots and making this espresso blend work that I would envision or put together.
As you grew and you were roasting, you're sourcing great coffees, you're tweaking the process of sourcing and roasting, and you've got your team and Holly kind of leading that quality control at the cafe level. There, came the time in 2008 where a lot of cafes were, hit with a downturn of the economy, and it kind of shifted things for your business as well. And I wonder if you can kind of go into that phase of PTs and how that impacted you.
That's a really good question, because now I can kind of go back again to 2002, 2003, because we're roasting our own coffees and everything's going well. We started wholesaling coffees. We started selling our coffees to other people here and there, locally, mostly in Topeka and Lawrence. And let me think, where was I? Yeah, so we're roasting our own coffees. But the thing we noticed was that we were by 2006, 2007, I was becoming aware that, I got a problem. I see other companies out there that are growing a lot faster than we are. And the problem is we were at Topeka, Kansas, a town of 100,000 people. And I just didn't have a market to sell more coffee. I could have named on one hand the restaurants in Topeka. Literally, the local restaurants in Topeka that were not franchises, you could count them on less than one hand, less than 5 fingers. And so it was challenging. I just didn't know who to sell coffee to. And we couldn't open up more cafes because there weren't enough people to support opening more than 2 cafes in the town at the time. We didn't think. As the market developed, it became easier to do. Anyway, so in 2008, we applied for the Roaster of the Year competition. I think the first 3 years were won by Counterculture, Stumptown, Intelligentsia. I don't know if it was that order or not, but those 3 guys won Roaster of the Year from Roast Magazine those first 3 years. And then PT's Coffee won the 4th year in 2009. I believe that's the way it all played out. It's been quite a while ago, but I believe that's the way it played out. We won in 2009. And that was a real turning point for us. The economy had just taken a big turn. You're right. The economy kind of crashed. Fortunately for us, because we did win Roaster of the Year, we were somewhat able to weather the storm, because all of a sudden we were getting even more calls for wholesale. And so our wholesale business grew. And as our wholesale business grew, it gave us an opportunity to even experiment with some new coffees. I bought some coffees from Joseph Brodsky. Many people may be familiar with his name. He owns a coffee farm in Panama now. In fact, he's the largest geisha producer in Panama, I'm told. He told me that. But back then he was bringing in coffees from Ethiopia, and we bought a coffee from him called Aricha. And there was Beloya was another one. And we were buying some of those coffees at $17, $18 a pound. At the time, back in 2007, 2008, those were unheard of prices. But we were taking those to road shows and coffee fest shows, and we'd set up a booth and we were showing those coffees. And so we were getting a lot of support on the wholesale side based on some really unique coffees that we were offering and having fun with and pulling shots with. But then it was interesting as we moved forward into, when do you think it was, 2010 to 2013, when there was really a roaster explosion. That sounds bad. I should rephrase that. But there was a boom of, I shouldn't say that either. There was a bunch of cafes. In fact, many of our customers were doing well enough that they decided they wanted to be roasters as well. How's that? That's much better. Anyway, so there was a growth in coffee roasters around the country, and all of a sudden that started hurting our wholesale business. So here we are, we're kind of going through these cycles of coffee, where it's based on the fact that we're in a small market in Topeka, Kansas. It was a little bit of a boom and bust for us. When we were unique and leading the industry, or right up there with the bigger roasters in Telly and Stumptown and Counterculture, and winning the Roaster of the Year award, that sort of thing, we were able to succeed and be successful. But then as other roasters entered the marketplace and people found coffee closer to home or more unique, or their marketing was better, or any number of other things, we found we lost a few customers here and there. And so we found ourselves in a little bit of a boom and bust cycle. And so we had to start thinking, what are we going to do to stabilize, to allow us to have a growth track that can be consistent, and allow us to open up, or allow us to grow our business more successfully and support our staff better. And it took us a little while back in those early days to figure out what that was going to be and how that was going to be, trying to find our place in the coffee cycles where we're not in a big market like Chicago or Portland or LA. We were trying to find what's our place in coffee with marketing that wasn't great. We felt like our product was exceptional, like we were every bit as good as the other roasters out there, but our marketing wasn't as great. We weren't as cool and hip because we were from Kansas. And so we weren't quite sure how we were going to succeed in the long run. And so we had to find another path. And it started with some friends in New York. And I can get into more of that later, but that track didn't work out, but it set me on a path to leveraging our business to kind of grow a little bit.
This idea of increasing capacity, every business faces at some point, because in order to kind of afford your own operations, you need to, create your own demand, so to speak. So you mentioned New York, and I know because I know your story, that is sort of the beginning of the time where the whole where Bird Rock Coffee comes into the picture of the PT's story or your story. Yeah. And so that was sort of the answer to this question you're asking yourself. And then I wonder if you could dive into that a little bit and talk about that phase of the business and how it answered those questions for you and your business.
You bet. Well, it takes some interesting twists and turns, but I'll share with you a little bit. One of the wholesale customers we had in 2008, 2009 was in New York. And it was a gentleman that called us and said he was going to open up a cafe. He wanted to use our coffee. He assured us, without saying who he was or who he was with, he said, I am very well funded and I have years of experience in the retail industry. This is what I want to do. And so we asked him what his plan was, and he said he wanted to use super automatic machines producing espresso and drip coffee and make everything push button like they do it in Europe. And he wanted to do that in New York. And I assured him I didn't believe that was a good idea, that we would do our best to work with him, but that we felt like if he put our product in a bad light, that we would probably have to stop working with him because we didn't want him to fail with using our product if he wasn't going to allow us to help him be more successful. But he wanted to use super automatics, and I said, I'll tell you what, we'll sell you some product and we'll see how it goes. And I said, let's stay in touch and let's keep the lines of communication open. And about 6 weeks in, he called me and said, Jeff, I need some help. It's not working. I said, well, let's at least put in a coffee brewer for you. And so we put in a coffee brewer. We dialed it in. We got him producing some really nice drip coffee, batch brew coffee. And he noticed his sales jumped immediately. And so I was like, okay. And he was like excited about that. But it still wasn't the model he'd envisioned that was kind of push button and easy, and he was going to be able to replicate it into 600 stores. And so he closed. And we're like, we knew he would. We tried to help him. We kind of left it at that and didn't worry about never really having known who he was or what his story was. But he was a nice guy, and we enjoyed trying to help him, but it didn't work out. Long story short, about 2 years later, he called and left a voicemail on my phone. Basically said he had been in Europe for the last 2 years working with his father, and he was back. And the biggest mistake he made was not listening to me to begin with, and that he wanted to invest in us. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. I wonder what that means. Wow. I wonder what he has in mind. Yeah. And so, when somebody calls you, you listen. And so I did, again, still not knowing what his background is. It turns out his family does own a multi-billion-dollar international company. I don't want to get into who it is, but they're a fragrance company. I'll just leave it there. And you can see them in virtually every airport in the world. Anyway, he was a very nice guy, and we chatted, and we tried for 2 years. I made probably 6 trips to New York, looking at locations with him, talking concepts with him. And in the end, I think what it boiled down to, because he was who he was, he kind of expected me to give him my business for less than I felt like it was worth. Does that make sense? Because he felt like he could grow it so much better than we could. And we weren't on the same page. And so eventually, after about 2 years of trying to negotiate, we walked away. And that was a hard decision to make, knowing how much money this guy had. We just didn't feel like we were ever going to see any of it, so it wasn't going to work. And so we said, we love you, we'll still be friends, but we're done negotiating. And we walked away. And at that point, I came back and sat down in Topeka again. And I'm like, what am I going to do now? The one guy who I thought wanted to invest in us is not going to work because he doesn't see it the way we see it. And so I started figuring, how am I going to do this? And I got to put together a plan. And I came up with the idea that we needed to get into a bigger market. And that's easy enough to say, we needed to get into a bigger market. Obviously, that was the case. I had, Willem Boot told me a long time ago. I asked him, I said, Willem, what should I do? And he said, sell it and move to a bigger city. And he laughed and walked away. And at the time I was like, man, I don't agree with that. And I was just stubborn, you know? I think, for lack of a better way to put it, I was just very stubborn about this. Like, I'm going to do it from Topeka, and the more you tell me I can't, the more I'm going to. You know, is kind of where I was coming from. I was just very stubborn about it, and I shouldn't have been, but I was. But then I finally kind of gave into that a little bit, and I said, you know, I'm going to leverage half the business. Actually, at the time, we were trying to leverage a quarter of the business, 25%, trying to raise some money so we could, Maritza and I, were going to move to a bigger city, DC, New York, somewhere, and we were going to open up 3 more cafes and a roastery in a bigger city and try and put out our flag in a market where we felt like it could grow. And we were all set to do that. And we actually found a friend of ours in Topeka who had wherewithal, shall we say, and he offered to invest in us. But his deal was he didn't want 25%, he wanted 50%. And he would help us grow the company, and he would be somewhat a silent partner. He's a very good friend. He's a very good man. I have nothing but, to this day, I just thank goodness for him. Cause he's educated me and shown me how to grow my business now effectively. But anyway, we sold half our business to him. And so now Fred and I have 2 additional partners, him and his partner, I should say. But they really do let us run our business and try to grow it the best way I see fit. So long story short, we now had an investor. We had some money. I flew off to Washington, D.C. I'd just come back from a trip to Ecuador, actually, traveling for about 14 days. And I immediately landed. I was home for like 3 days, and I went off to D.C. to go look for locations. And I looked at 30 different properties, came home with a whole stack full of papers to go through and decide which ones we wanted to put in an offer on. And then my wife and I were going to move to Washington, D.C. And just as I got home from that trip to D.C., I wasn't feeling well. And I was laying on the couch, and I got a call from Chuck Patton, who owned Bird Rock Coffee. The way the call from Chuck kind of came about is interesting in itself. Going back to 2010, I believe it was. This is 2016 now, or 2016, summer of 2016. But going back to 2010, Chuck and I had been on a sourcing trip together in Nicaragua. He was just getting started. He was about 4 years into his business, Bird Rock Coffee. And he and I were now traveling together and buying coffee together. And I was trying to, we were sharing knowledge and doing whatever we did and having fun. And one of the times we were in Nicaragua, we were literally out one evening drinking a beer and saying, man, aren't we the luckiest guys in the world? We get to travel and do this for a living. And Chuck said, if I just didn't have to own a retail cafe, this would be the best business ever. He's like, I just don't dig being in the retail business. And I said, just off the cuff back in 2010, well, if you ever want to sell your business, you let me know because I'd love to live in San Diego. At the time, I could no more have afforded that statement. If he'd have said, I'll sell it to you right now, I'd have been like, oh, well, I haven't actually got any money. But I love the idea. But it just so happened, literally, the stars aligned. That my contact in New York, who I hoped would invest in us and make us go global, that fell through. But I had found an investor. I felt like I knew right where I wanted to go. I had a 3 to 5 year plan. And then Chuck called, and my 3 to 5 year plan got torn up, and we moved to San Diego and bought Bird Rock Coffee. And basically bought 3 stores and a roastery instead of opening 3 stores and a roastery. So wow. That's how we ended up in San Diego. Yeah.
And I want to say all of a sudden, but it's just not all of a sudden. It's a lot of connections. It's a lot of investing yourself in just the next opportunity, and you never know, like, these things just happen. And it's just fascinating to hear that come back to you that way. And it almost is it's a cautionary tale in a sense of don't be impatient with the process of your own business's evolution.
Yeah. There's it is interesting. You have to try to get along with everybody. And I've not always been the best at that. Like most people in the coffee industry, I drink too much coffee, and I've probably overreacted at times and been inappropriate at times, but you have to always try to get along with everybody because you never know what's going to come around the bend later on. And I've been very fortunate in that regard.
So let's talk a little bit about what life is like now that you have these retail spaces and roastery and you're in San Diego. What does the scope of your work look like right now?
You have to keep an open mind, and you have to constantly be willing to adapt and change is the best way I can say it. When we bought Bird Rock, Maurice and I had the van loaded, and we literally, the day we signed the contracts, we hit the road and moved to San Diego. Very excited, buying the number one cafe in our mind in San Diego. Place was doing huge volume of business in one cafe with 2 others that were just getting started. And we felt like a huge opportunity. Little did we know that was also the beginning of a boom in coffee shops in San Diego. Since 2016, and I've had other coffee shop owners tell me the same thing. It's like, dude, when you moved here, there were virtually no coffee shops, and now there are like 50. It's like everybody wanted to be what Chuck had created, is what it boiled down to, and he sold at the perfect time, which is fine. That's part of business, right? You have to adapt. And so I moved here and immediately started to open 3 more cafes myself, in part because I just invested a lot of money and I needed to create additional income to be able to pay that money back. Yes, I sold half my business and had some money to invest, but we leveraged that in order to buy the business and then to open up some more businesses. So I needed to open up some more cafes, and I needed to generate some extra revenue to create the revenue streams to pay back some loans that we also took out.
Here's a practical question, because you came from, you bought these cafes and you come in and you open 3 more. And it sounds like, oh, wow, you can just do that. And, in a sense, yes. But I'm thinking, how do you go into a situation like that, having not any history with them, and opening 3 cafes that will be successful, hopefully successful, even though you're not steeped in the culture of that bar? Like, how, practically speaking, did you go about creating this growth, being a new owner? What kind of things did you need to overcome in order to do that successfully?
It's a great question, and it's not an easy answer. First of all, I came in somewhat, I tried to believe I came in humble and open to whatever I was going to learn from these guys. But at the same time, I came in extremely confident that I could make this work, and I knew what I was doing, and I knew exactly what Chuck was doing. What he was in his cafes were no different than any other cafe out there. We all go through the same things. We all just have minute differences and challenges we have to overcome at any given time. But effectively, we're all running espresso bars, and we have employees, and we need to adapt to those challenges and adapt to our labor. We need to understand how to manage our labor, because labor is a finite figure. You can't just overstaff all the time and expect to stay in business. You have to staff appropriately. And so we've gone through some changes because some of the employees that were here when Chuck was the owner, part of it was they were ready to move on too. His company had been growing so fast, and a lot of them were getting job offers. We had a barista that went off to work for some espresso machine companies in Seattle. We had another one that went off, and two or three others that went off and opened their own espresso cafes. And so we had, over the course of 2 years, we turned over a lot of employees, but we also brought in a lot of great employees, and we've recreated our own culture. And so now we probably have a handful, probably 5 of the 35 employees that were here 3 years ago who were working as baristas. And that's not surprising to me because, one, there was a new ownership in town, and they were growing, and it was different than it was when Chuck ran it. And Chuck was in the cafe every day and buying everybody drinks at night. And they were having fun, but they were working hard. It was just a little bit different now. Jeff wasn't going to be in the cafe every day because Jeff had to go out and was trying to open up a new cafe. I was looking at different real estate options, and I was working with designers on how we're going to build this cafe and what espresso machines we're going to use. And I'm trying to do what I can to help grow and promote the company. I hired good general managers. I hired basically a guy to come in who helped be the general manager of the company and oversee the cafes for me. And I hired 2 or 3 good trainers who worked with staff on quality control and managed the quality control. And my wife managed the quality control of the coffee. She took over the buying for Bird Rock Coffee. And she would do all the cupping on a daily basis and was cupping with staff.
Right.
And
she's a
we went
Q
through our
grader
challenges.
herself.
Oh yeah, she's been a Q grader, I think, since, she actually was one of the very first in Columbia to get the Q grader license. We were looking at those certificates just the other day, actually. She passed all the Q grader certificates before they would actually give her the Q grader license, because there weren't enough of them in Columbia that they actually wanted to give it out yet. It's a long story, but anyway, yeah. So she was literally one of the very first in Columbia to get the Q grader certification, and Q grader instructor as well. So yeah, she's very, very qualified. That was another reason I stepped back from the coffee side and moved more towards the business side, because I didn't need to compete with my wife. Anybody that's married out there knows that's not a good idea.
Right.
So I allowed my wife to do what she excelled at, and I stepped back and learned another new role. And this time it was, how do I grow the business?
So when you're pursuing the growth of the business and you're putting people in charge, like the general manager, and you've got other people that are taking on responsibilities that like you said earlier, you can't do everything yourself. You learn this with PTs and your journey there.
Correct.
Hiring people that actually can do that job well, not just on paper, but that are a cultural fit for what you're building. Even though you had that turnover, and inevitably, no matter how hard you try, different is going to equal a bit of that for sure. How do you go about how do you go about making sure that you've got the right person for that job? It's such a critical role, general manager and even shop managers.
The one, I think my approach to it has been, and I still work on this every day, everybody I work with has a different personality. They are different people. They come to it with their own set of challenges they live with on a daily basis. They're all different. It's my job to try and understand them and communicate on their level. That's the way I approach it. It's not my staff's job to come to work and please me. It's me to try to understand who they are and where they're coming from so I can get the most out of them when they are at work. Because I also don't expect them to work 24/7. In California, you can't do that. So when they are at work, and when I do have them working, and when we're working together on projects, I try to understand. I don't always achieve this anymore, and it's just some things I've learned along the way. But it is that I have to learn to understand they're all coming from different problems. Many of the people I've hired now have families, and so their approach to a coffee shop is much different than it was back in the early 2000s when we were all 28 to 35 years old and single and having fun, and we weren't worried about all that stuff. Well, now we are. We want to go home and be with our families in the evening, and I respect that, and I want them to do that. And so I think that's the one thing I've learned is I try to understand my staff. I try to have conversations, and I try to respect that they have their own lives as well. And I want them to have happiness in their lives, because if they're happy in their lives, they'll be happy at work as well.
That's great. So when you consider the growth of the business, what is the ultimate goal in growth? And obviously it's not growth just for growth's sake, because what you're just talking about now is sort of a place of, hey, I recognize that there's a limitation to the hustle that you have to put in, or you have available to put in now. And so there's a balance,
Correct.
it seems, to this growth. And so what is the end of this growth? What is the goal of expanding Bird Rock right now?
Great question. And I think we are, meaning my team, the guys I'm working with now, the guys and the women I'm working with now, we are evaluating, we evaluate that all the time. In fact, going through the past 8 months, we've all kind of agreed that we don't need to open any more cafes. We've just opened 3 in 2 years, and we're remodeling a 4th. And we were kind of at a point where it's like, man, we need all hands on deck, focusing on each individual cafe right now to work out the systems, get everything in place so that managers have all the tools they need to effectively manage a cafe with just limited input from me. Because I can't be at 6 cafes all the time. And I don't want to be. I don't even want to try to be at 6 cafes all the time. So we have spent the last 8 months literally putting together the employee job descriptions, the tasks. I mean, all the things you need to run a daily cafe. Doing write-ups of employees. We've had turnover, which you have with any new business. And when you have 100 employees, you're going to have some ongoing turnover, especially in a market where the minimum wage is $13 and heading to $15. It becomes a competitive market. And so we've been trying to find the best employees we can find, pay them fairly, train them well, and do whatever we can to keep them, because training gets really expensive. And we're trying to build a good team, because as I've spoken with my leadership team, so to speak, I don't call them that, but if you will, my general manager and the trainers and my CFO, when I talk to them, we all agree that, yeah, we think we have the resources and the personnel to open another cafe or 2, but not yet. We still have a little bit more work we need to do. We need to get a little more organized. And we meet every Monday morning. We meet for 3 hours, and we throw everything out on the table. Where are we? What do we need to do next? What's our next challenge? Okay. And after we get that one done in 6 weeks, where are we going after that? So that we're always looking forward. And we always kind of have an idea of what we're working on and what needs to be achieved. And so far, I'm really impressed with my team, because we are knocking things off left and right, just one at a time. We're having some little successes, and I think we're getting close to another cafe or 2 more cafes in the very near future.
Great. So it sounds like just the more you grow, the more you can do, and the more you can do right by the people that you employ.
Agreed. Yeah, that's it, basically. I don't have if you ask me what's my goal for the next 3 to 5 years for number of cafes, I don't think anybody should even try to answer that question, given where the coffee market is right now. Because when I bought Bird Rock, I had no idea 25 cafes were going to open up, and that's a random number. I don't know that it's actually 25, but it probably is. It's a very close number. If it's not accurate, it might actually be more than that number. But I had no idea, nor did any of the other coffee shops that opened have any idea that so many were going to open in such a short window. But that many have opened in the last 2 to 3 years. And so those people that used to drive all the way across town to get our coffee, well, they don't need to anymore. There's good coffee in a lot of different places in San Diego. And I'm very happy about that. We have San Diego is a great market for coffee right now, and there's a lot of great coffee here. And for the most part, we all get along. We all work together, and we all encourage everybody to go to all the other cafes. I, in no means, say just come to Bird Rock. Support all the other cafes as well, and then find the one you like the best. We often believe, because we're confident too, that if you do that, you'll like ours and you'll come back to us. But there is a lot of great coffee here. And so if I were to say I want to open up 8 more cafes in the next 2 years or 3 years or 5 years, that'd be crazy, because I don't know that I can find that many locations in this market. And to open up outside of this market, means a commitment of 3 to 5 shops because you have to be able to put together a management team in that market. And so projecting where we're going to go next really is going to be a tough call and a major investment, to be quite honest.
Yeah, it just
so I
has
don't
to
know
make
that
sense.
I can say, yeah, it just has to make sense. That's what it boils down to. And so right now we're focused on what we're doing now, dotting all of our I's and crossing all of our T's, making sure everything's in place, making sure that everything's running smoothly, and we're all, okay, well, I think I'm going to go home now and have a good evening with my family. I can, stress-free. And then we can talk, do we want to create more stress in our lives? So,
Nice.
You know what I'm saying?
Nice. Yeah, I do.
First of all, let's try to get some stress-free moments here, We've had a lot of stress over the last 2 or 3 years. I need my team to have a little bit of a break to enjoy their families. So, and then we'll cover the growth later on when the time is right.
Last question for you, Jeff. And this has been really fascinating to hear about the evolution of just your career, PTs, and Bird Rock, and all that you've learned through those efforts. And I want to know, speaking to other coffee shop owners, operators, what would your advice be in terms of, we all want to have successful businesses. We want to grow our businesses and do right by the people that are making our dreams a reality. And so what would you say are a couple of, or maybe just the one thing to really focus on that will move the needle on having a thriving business?
I don't know that I've got any advice for anybody else other than, of all the mistakes I've made over the past 27 years, and there have been many, no doubt about that. The one thing that really strikes me is respecting other people's families. Before I had a kid, before I had my son, I had no idea what it meant to have a kid, and I've had employees who had kids, and I didn't respect that enough because I didn't know what it meant to have a kid. Now that I've got my own, I'm like, if I could go back in time, I would have changed the way I reacted to those situations a lot different. And I think we're all probably the same because we don't know what it's like until you have your own child and the love that's involved in that. I'm sure you can attest to that.
Right.
So I think that's the one thing I've learned, and I think that I would encourage everybody is make sure you appreciate your family first. The coffee business is the coffee business. There is no holy grail we're all chasing here. It is a business, and we all love great coffee, and we can all buy great coffee. There's been such a revolution in quality coffee, in specialty coffee, over the past 15 to 20 years that there's lots of great coffee available for all roasters and all cafes. The important part is to do what you can to buy the best coffee you can buy and then enjoy your family. And then the last piece of advice I would give anybody is a piece of advice that a gentleman named Dave Bolter, who's a good friend of mine, like a family member of mine in Lawrence, Kansas, said to me years ago. He said, there's only 2 reasons to own a business. You own a business to buy back your time. In other words, you employ other people to do work so you don't have to, or you build a business to sell it so you can buy back your time. The only reason to own a business is to buy back your time in life so that you can spend it with your family effectively, is what he was telling me. And that's true. I find after everything I've learned, and I can restate that if you'd like, but basically that's the advice he gave me a long time ago. And I see it and I believe it wholeheartedly now and that's kind of what I've tried to do. I've trained myself since I opened these coffee shops in 1993. My goal has always been to learn something. I learned to be a barista. I learned to open a cafe. I learned to roast coffee. Then I learned how to source coffee. And then I learned how to, start getting into business and do wholesale. And then I learned how to get into business and how to start talking about leveraging my business to maybe make some money on it. But each time I had to learn something different. And each time I did, I realized I needed to train myself out of that other role. I need to hire somebody else to fulfill that other role so that I could move on to the next role I needed to occupy. And that includes sourcing coffee, and cupping coffee and quality control. And once I met my wife and I realized that we got married and I realized she's so much better at this than I am. Why am I still trying? Why are we both trying to do the same job? I had to find another role for myself. And so now I find myself really focusing more on the business and the people of the company, than the coffee itself. I still love coffee. For goodness gracious, don't misunderstand me. That's still my focus. but the business as a whole is also my focus. Is more of a focus for me, taking care of my team, because there's only two reasons to own a business. It's you build it to buy back your time, which is kind of what I'm focusing on, so I can go pick my child up at school every day, which I have to go in about 15 minutes here, or you build it to sell it. And I'm not ready to sell yet. Not saying that day's not going to come someday, but I certainly can't envision selling at this point. I like what I'm doing. I love the people I work with. And I still see lots more opportunity for within what we're doing to grow and create more opportunities for my staff so they can make more money, which is ultimately what I'm trying to do, allow them to create lives and create careers.
Excellent. Well, we're really thankful that you are doing what you're doing, and I'm really appreciate all of the insights that you've given us today, the window into your career and the business's evolution. Again, this has really been an awesome conversation. How do we stay in touch with what's going on at Bird Rock? Give us some places to go online so we can visit and buy some coffee.
Yeah, I mean, obviously come to our website, birdrockcoffee.com. That's the easiest place to find us, or ptscoffee.com. Bird Rock and PTs. I didn't talk much about PTs after I made the transition to Bird Rock, but PTs has also opened up 3 new cafes. So we have a total of 4 cafes now at PTs as well. So I opened 3 in San Diego, and I opened 3 in, or not I did, but we as a team did, opened 3 in Kansas City and Topeka over the last 2 years. So we've been plenty busy. 6 cafes in 2 years. So yeah, PTs is doing well as well. So visit both ptscoffee.com or birdrockcoffee.com. Follow us on Instagram, PT's Coffee, or at Bird Rock Coffee, and of course on Facebook. Or if nothing else, just email us and say hi.
Sweet. Thank you so much, Jeff. Pleasure having you on the show. And again, this was really a treat. Thank you.
Well, Chris, it's my pleasure. It's been a pleasure knowing you, dude. You've had a great career as well. I'd love to hear your story told on this podcast someday. I'd like to hear somebody. I'd like to interview you and have you tell us your story, because you've had a good career. You've led a lot of people to success as well.
We got a little, my wife interviewed me for a Valentine's Day episode a little bit. So there's
awesome.
Part of that story is there. So yeah, you'll have to listen to that.
Great. I will, for sure.
Thanks,
I'm sorry
Jeff.
I missed that one. All right, Chris. Take care, buddy. Thank you so much.
Well, as I said in the beginning, I think one of the main themes here for Jeff's story, it is one step at a time. In that there's not this grand narrative, but it's just like as opportunities come up, pick the thing that makes the most sense for you and the business at that time and see where it takes you. And I know it can be really easy to try to figure out all the angles so that nothing surprises you. But, that's just not the way life works. And if we had all the knowledge beforehand, we might not choose some of the things that end up being the best things for us. And I think Jeff would agree with that. So a big thank you to my guest today, Jeff Taylor. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your story with us. Thank you for all of your years of work in specialty coffee to help make this industry a great one. And we can't wait to see what's next for PTs and for Bird Rock Coffee. Now, speaking of that, you can find the links to all of those companies and their Instagram accounts, etc., in the show notes to this episode. Now, if you want the transcript for this episode, you can go to keystotheshop.com and on the contact page, just hit the button that says sign me up for the newsletter. And you'll be signed up to receive an email that has the transcript for this episode, as well as helpful links from resources mentioned in the podcast, and maybe some extra resources as well that will help you in your business and career that are either related to the subject or the episode, or are just things that I've come across in my reading and searching on the internets to help you develop your professional life. So go to keystotheshop.com on the contact page and sign up there. And you can also just contact me directly by going to that page on keystotheshop.com. I'd love to hear from you if you have any feedback or comments about the show. How can we improve? How can we make this show better for you? One of the things I think I'm probably going to end up doing with this show is we're going to start working on getting these episode lengths down a little bit. I know several of you have commented to me in the past that it's a little bit much and it's hard to consume an hour, or in this case, over an hour worth of content. So, and me talking like this is just extending it. So you're welcome. Anyway, there things like that I do listen to, and I want to know what you're thinking about this show. So email me. So contact me through there, or just email me, chris@keystotheshop.com. And I also want to hear from you if you need consulting or training for your business. Keys to the Shop Consulting can help you at any stage of your business's growth and development, from concept to scaling. And I would love to, have a conversation with you and see what works for you. Even something like over the phone consultation. There's a wide range of things that we can do to help you in your journey in coffee. So chris@keystotheshop.com is the email to use to set up a phone call for that. And now, lastly, here I want to draw your attention to two things that are coming up that Keys to the Shop is involved with. The first thing is in March 26th through the 27th, I will be joining the great Ildi Revi over at Ally Coffee in Greenville, South Carolina. We're going to be putting on something called the Community of Practice for Cafe Leaders. And what it's going to be focused on is a workshop and seminar to help you thrive as an owner or leader in the coffee bar. And if you're in a management position or leadership position of any kind, this is a great opportunity for you. Very accessibly priced. And we cover a host of things like how your power impacts your work relationships, how to care for those you've delegated authority to, being empathetic in your systems and solutions that you create in the cafe. And we're open for a lot of Q&A to help you develop a better skill set as a leader in the coffee shop. And this is going to be a really powerful time that equips and refreshes you in your leadership. So to sign up for that, just go to the link in the show notes for this Ally Coffee class. And I hope to see you March 26th through the 27th. Now, also, if you are looking for something to do next week and over the weekend and into the week, you're going to be wanting to check out Coffee Fest in New York City. If you're in the area and you want to go to the best coffee trade show for coffee retailers, Coffee Fest is a place to go. I've been going, for a very long time, well over 40 times I've been to this show as an instructor, as a competitor, as a judge. And every year I'm impressed by the variety of different people that attend the show. Lots of different people that are just starting their shop. They're maybe looking to scale their store. People from all different places in their specialty coffee retail journey attend Coffee Fest because they know it's a place that has an incredible amount of resources available to them for networking, for resources and classes and seminars, and it's all so accessible. A lot of it's free and or very accessibly priced. And so if you go to coffeefest.com and click on the New York show, you'll find out who's going to be there, who's on the show floor, who's giving seminars, and I'll be one of the people giving a few talks on management and leadership. So the dates for that are March 8th through the 10th. If you're going to be attending the show, please do look for me and say hello. I'd love to meet you. And with that, I thank you for joining us on the show. There is a very special episode coming up next week. I hope you tune in for that. Next Tuesday is going to be the 300th broadcast of Keys to the Shop. Technically speaking, with shift breaks included, we've had 300 episodes. We just celebrated 200 main episodes recently, but I'm all about celebrating Keys to the Shop, and I hope you don't mind if I make a big deal about 300 broadcasts and of Keys to the Shop. We have a very special episode celebrating that. And you just stay tuned to the Instagram account to see what that's going to be. I'm really psyched about it, so stay tuned. And I hope you have an awesome week. Thanks for listening and for sharing these shows with your friends. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.